It's strange how, at first glance, nothing seems different. The streets are still filled with cars, people shuffle through their daily lives, and the lights of the city flicker as they always have. But there's something beneath the surface, a tremor you can't quite put your finger on. If you listen closely, you can almost feel it. A silence, like the moment before a storm tears through everything in its path. Earlier this morning, the markets didn't just stumble, they collapsed. At 9:42 a.m., trading on the New York Stock Exchange stopped completely, not paused for a moment to stabilize, but halted outright. The official explanation? A technical issue. But anyone paying attention knows better. The system was overwhelmed. Numbers fell so fast and so violently that the algorithms designed to keep things in check couldn't keep up. Stocks that were the cornerstone of retirement funds, college savings plans, and pensions lost their value in minutes. For years, we've heard about how the market always rebounds, how there's nothing to worry about. And for years, we believed it. But today, that belief has been shattered. Across the country, banks are quietly putting limits on withdrawals. Some ATMs are already out of cash, their screens flashing temporarily unavailable as people in line fumble with their cards, hoping it's just a glitch. Grocery stores are seeing shelves empty at record speed. Milk, bread, baby formula, all snatched up by people who don't know if they'll find anything tomorrow. The panic is spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't always like this. Just a year ago, the economy seemed untouchable. Headlines celebrated record profits, tech stocks soared to unimaginable heights, and housing prices reached levels that didn't seem real. But that was the first sign, wasn't it? When houses in neighborhoods like yours and mine started selling for twice their value, when people stretched every penny to afford a mortgage, it should have been obvious. The cracks were already forming. We just didn't see them. Or maybe we didn't want to. But this collapse didn't come out of nowhere. It was years, decades even, in the making. It began with whispers, quiet warnings that inflation was creeping higher, that debt was piling up faster than anyone could keep track of. But those warnings were drowned out by the noise of optimism. Things are better than ever, they said. The market is strong, they said. And we wanted to believe them because the alternative was too unsettling to face. Now here we are. The banks we trusted are locking their doors. Families who spent their entire lives saving for a sense of security are standing in lines that stretch for blocks, hoping to withdraw just enough to get by. Retirees who thought they'd earned a peaceful future are watching their pensions disappear. It's happening so fast, and yet it feels like we've been sliding toward this moment forever. This morning, I walked by what used to be a bustling shopping district. The coffee shops were closed, their windows dark. The once polished sidewalks were littered with paper cups and crumpled receipts, blowing aimlessly in the wind. A man sat on the curb with his head in his hands, a briefcase beside him as if he'd just walked out of an office that doesn't exist anymore. He wasn't crying, just staring at the ground, motionless. I didn't ask his name, but I didn't have to. His story is everywhere now. For years, we measured progress in numbers, stock indexes, GDP growth, corporate earnings reports. But those numbers never told the whole story. They didn't show the families living paycheck to paycheck, or the small businesses barely scraping by. And now, those numbers are falling apart, leaving behind the people they were supposed to represent. In one of the wealthiest cities in the world, breadlines are forming. Parents are clutching their children close, scanning the shelves for anything they can afford. One woman I saw was holding 2 loaves of bread and a carton of eggs, her hands trembling as she counted out crumpled bills and loose change. When the cashier told her she was short, she just stood there, silent, staring at the counter as if willing the money to appear. These are the moments that stick with you. Not the headlines, not the graphs or charts, but the faces, the fear, the desperation. But this isn't just a story about today. To understand how we got here, you have to look back. You have to see the choices that led to this, the risks we took, the warnings we ignored, the greed that consumed everything in its path. This collapse didn't happen overnight. It's the result of a system built on the illusion of endless growth, on the promise that tomorrow would always be better than today. Now that illusion is gone. Tonight, as you sit in your home, maybe glancing at your phone or the TV, wondering how this will end, I don't have an answer for you. I wish I did. but what I can tell you is this. We're standing at the edge of something new. Whether that's rebuilding or ruin is up to us. The first wave of panic started in the cities, but it didn't take long for the cracks to reach small towns and rural areas. In places where life used to feel steady, even predictable, the unraveling has begun. I heard from a farmer in Kansas earlier today, a man named Henry. He's been working the same land his family has owned for generations. He told me how the price of diesel shot up so high that he couldn't afford to run his tractors anymore. His crops are still in the field, but they might as well be miles away for all the good they're doing him. He said, "I can't even get them to market." The buyers stopped calling last week, said there's no money to pay for new shipments. So what am I supposed to do? Just watch everything rot out there? Henry's voice cracked when he said it. You could tell he wasn't just talking about his crops. He was talking about everything. The land, his family, his life. He didn't know what to do next. And honestly, neither did I. Out in Montana, I heard from a single mother named Clara. She used to work as a waitress in a small diner, the kind of place where everyone knows your name. But when people stopped eating out, the diner shut its doors. She told me she's been spending her mornings in line at a local food pantry, waiting hours just to get a box of canned goods and pasta. She's got 2 kids, Emma and Toby. Emma's 9, Toby's 6. They keep asking me when we'll have pancakes again, she said. I don't have the heart to tell them we might not. What struck me most was what she said next. I did everything right. I worked hard. I saved what I could. And now I'm standing in line hoping there's enough peanut butter left when it's my turn. You can hear the frustration, the betrayal in her voice. And she's not alone. Her story is one of millions. People who played by the rules and still ended up here, wondering what they could have done differently. But it's not just individuals. Entire communities are being gutted. I spoke to a teacher in Ohio who said her school district sent out a notice last week. Budget cuts. They're closing 3 schools at the end of the month. She told me, it's not just about losing my job. These kids, they don't have anywhere else to go. For some of them, school is the only place they feel safe, the only place they get a hot meal. What's going to happen to them? It's a question I keep coming back to. What happens to the people who were barely hanging on before all this? The ones who didn't have a cushion to fall back on? The answer, from what I've seen, is simple. They fall, hard, and once they're down, it's almost impossible to get back up. Even the so-called safety nets are starting to tear. Food banks are running out of supplies. Shelters are turning people away because they're full. And the agencies that were supposed to step in during a crisis like this? They're overwhelmed, underfunded, or just gone. I read a letter today from a man named Harold. He's 72, a retired teacher. He wrote about how he spent his entire career putting money aside, saving for the day he wouldn't have to work anymore. He never lived extravagantly, never took big risks. He thought he'd done everything right. But when the banks collapsed, so did his pension. Now he's down to his last $40. I never thought I'd end up like this, he wrote. I thought I'd earned my peace, but now I don't even know if I'll make it through the winter. I keep thinking about Harold, about Clara, about Henry. These aren't people who made bad choices or gambled recklessly. They're people who trusted the system, who believed that if they worked hard and saved responsibly, they'd be okay. And now, that trust is gone. And when trust disappears, something else starts to take its place. Anger, desperation, fear. You can see it in the protests springing up across the country. In Chicago, people gathered outside a major bank last night, demanding answers. It started peacefully, but as the night wore on, tensions boiled over. Windows were smashed. Police showed up in riot gear. By morning, the street was littered with broken glass and scattered belongings. It's not just in the cities. In rural areas where people once prided themselves on being self-sufficient, the cracks are just as visible. Neighbors who used to greet each other with a smile now avoid eye contact. Fences are going up. Gates are being locked. One farmer I spoke to in Tennessee said he's been sleeping with a shotgun by his bed. It's not the wolves I'm worried about, he said. It's my neighbors. This is what happens when the fabric of society starts to tear. People stop seeing each other as neighbors, as friends, as fellow human beings. they start seeing threats, rivals, competitors in a game none of us wanted to play. But in the midst of all this, there are still glimmers of something else. Something quieter, but just as real. I heard about a group of families in Michigan who've banded together, pooling their resources to make sure everyone has enough. They're planting gardens in abandoned lots, fixing up old tools, teaching each other skills they never thought they'd need. One of them told me, "We don't have much, but we've got each other. And right now that's all that matters." It's not enough to undo the damage, not yet, but it's a start. The collapse isn't just about losing money or jobs. It's about losing the rhythms of life we all took for granted. The little things we thought would always be there. The grocery store down the street. The coffee shop where you'd meet a friend. The warm glow of streetlights lining the roads we traveled every day. It's as if the world we knew is being dismantled piece by piece, leaving something unfamiliar in its place. In some towns, the lights have already gone out, not just metaphorically, but literally. Entire neighborhoods plunged into darkness because the utility companies couldn't keep up with unpaid bills. People are learning to live without the conveniences they once considered essential. Candles instead of light bulbs. Buckets of water hauled from nearby streams. Meals cooked over fire pits because the gas has been shut off. But even in the darkness, people are finding ways to adapt. In Colorado, I heard about a retired engineer who rigged up a wind turbine from scraps he found at a junkyard. It's not much, but it's enough to power a few homes in his neighborhood. He didn't do it for money. There's no such thing as extra cash these days. He did it because, as he put it, if we don't help each other, we're not going to make it. That's something I keep coming back to. The idea that survival isn't just about looking out for yourself. It's about looking out for each other. That's what I saw in a small town in Michigan where a group of families has turned an abandoned factory into a community hub. They're growing vegetables in old shipping containers, raising chickens in what used to be the loading dock, and hosting shared meals in the main hall. It's not perfect, but it's working. And in a time like this, that's enough. I spoke to one of the people involved, a man named Thomas. He used to work as a machinist before the factory shut down. Now he spends his days fixing bikes and tools, trading his skills for food and other essentials. "It's funny," he said. "Before all this, I used to think about retirement, about how I'd finally get to slow down. Now I'm working harder than ever, but it feels different. It feels like it matters." That's something I've heard from others too. There's a sense of purpose in these small acts of resilience. A feeling that, for all the chaos and loss, there's still something worth fighting for. But not everyone is finding that sense of purpose. For every story of neighbors banding together, there's another of people turning on each other. In some cities, looting has become a nightly event. Not for luxury items, but for food, medicine, and blankets. I heard about a man in Atlanta who was attacked for a loaf of bread he'd just bought at the last open store in his area. He didn't even make it home. It's not just the thefts, it's the fear. The way it seeps into everything. People are barricading their doors, mistrusting everyone they see. A friend told me about a neighborhood in Texas where the residents have set up checkpoints at every entrance. They're not letting strangers in, no matter what the reason. "We have to protect what's ours," they said. But at what cost? I think about that a lot. The cost of survival. The way it can strip away our humanity if we're not careful. But then I remember stories like the one from Oregon, where a group of kids started a free library out of an old shed. It's filled with donated books, games, and puzzles, small comforts in a world that's lost so many. They call it their Hope Hut. One of the kids, a 12-year-old named Maria, told me, "It's not just about the books. It's about giving people a place to come and feel normal, even if it's just for a little while." That's what keeps me going, even as the headlines grow darker. The small, quiet acts of kindness. The reminders that no matter how bad things get, we still have the capacity to care for one another. But caring isn't easy when you're hungry, or cold, or scared. And for millions of people, those are the only things they feel right now. The safety nets we always thought would catch us, unemployment benefits, social services, charity organizations, they've been stretched too thin to hold. Some have snapped altogether. I think about Clara and her kids, Emma and Toby, still standing in line at that food pantry. still waiting for the pancakes she might never be able to make. I think about Harold, wondering how long his $40 will last. And I think about all the others whose names I don't know, whose stories I'll never hear, but who are living through this collapse just the same. If this is what life looks like now, what will it look like in a month, a year, 10 years? I don't have the answer. But I do know this. We can't go back to the way things were. That world is gone. And maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. Maybe this is our chance to build something better, something more just, more humane. But that won't happen on its own. It's up to us to decide what comes next. The collapse hasn't just taken away our sense of stability. It's forcing us to question everything we once believed in. For decades, we built our lives around systems that seemed unshakable. We trusted the banks to protect our savings, the markets to grow our investments, and the government to step in when things went wrong. Now, those pillars are crumbling, leaving behind a vacuum that no one seems prepared to fill. It's not just about losing money, it's about losing trust. I spoke to a man named Michael the other day, a mechanic who's been working in the same small shop since he was 18. He told me how, in the span of 2 weeks, his entire world fell apart. First, the shop couldn't afford to keep the lights on. Then, the bank froze his account, citing technical difficulties. And finally, his landlord raised the rent, blaming economic uncertainty. Michael said, "I've done everything by the book my whole life, paid my taxes, worked hard, never asked for handouts, and now I feel like the ground's been ripped out from under me." He paused, his voice trembling. "I don't know who to trust anymore." That sentiment is everywhere now. People are questioning not just their banks or their employers, but their neighbors, their communities, even themselves. And when trust disappears, fear takes its place. Fear that the little you have will be taken from you. Fear that the people you rely on will turn their backs. Fear that tomorrow will somehow be worse than today. You can see it in the way people are acting. In some neighborhoods, fences are going up overnight. Windows are being boarded, not because of storms, but because of the unknown. People aren't just preparing for the worst, they're expecting it. And when you live like that, something inside you starts to change. I heard about a woman named Rachel in Kentucky. She's a single mother of 3 who lost her job when the factory she worked at shut down. She's been living in her car for the past month, trying to stretch what little she has left. Last week, someone broke into her car while she was asleep. They didn't take much, just a bag of groceries she'd managed to buy the day before. But it wasn't the loss that shook her. It was the realization that someone else was desperate enough to steal from someone who clearly had so little. Rachel told me, "I wanted to be angry, but I couldn't. Because I get it. I know what it feels like to look at your kids and wonder how you're going to feed them." She paused, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just wish it didn't have to be like this. That's the thing, isn't it? None of us wanted this. None of us asked for it. But here we are, trying to navigate a world that feels increasingly unrecognizable. The ripple effects are everywhere. Schools are closing because they can't afford to pay teachers. Hospitals are turning people away because they don't have the staff or supplies to keep up. Small businesses, the backbone of so many communities, are shutting their doors for good. And as these institutions collapse, the fabric of society is being pulled apart thread by thread. But even in the midst of this unraveling, there are threads of hope. I heard about a group of farmers in Iowa who've started a cooperative. They're pooling their resources, sharing equipment, and dividing their harvests to make sure everyone gets enough to eat. It's not about profit anymore, it's about survival. One of them, a man named George, said, "We're doing this because we don't have a choice. If we don't look out for each other, who will?" That's a question I've been asking myself a lot lately. Who will look out for us? The government, the corporations, the banks? They've all shown us what they're really made of, and it's not much. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the only people we can rely on are each other. In a small town in Oregon, there's a retired teacher named Lydia who's been holding informal classes in her living room. She's teaching kids how to read, how to do basic math, how to think critically about the world around them. She told me, "These kids need something to hold on to. They need to know that learning still matters, even if everything else feels like it's falling apart. Lydia doesn't have much. Her pension is gone, and she's living off what little she saved before the collapse. But she's giving what she can, not because she has to, but because she believes it's the right thing to do. And that, more than anything, gives me hope. Because for all the fear and despair, there are still people out there who refuse to give up. People who are finding ways to adapt, to rebuild, to create something new out of the ashes. It's not easy, and it's not always enough. But it's a start. And maybe, just maybe, that's all we need. In times like these, survival isn't just about food, water, or shelter. It's about the people around you. The connections we have, or don't have, are what make the difference between holding on and giving up. And right now, those connections are being tested in ways we've never experienced before. I spoke to a woman named Teresa from a small town in Georgia. She told me how her neighborhood has changed over the past few months. Before, it was the kind of place where people kept to themselves. Everyone had their routines. Polite waves in the morning, quick conversations at the mailbox, but nothing deeper than that. Now, she says, it feels different. People are leaning on each other in ways they never expected. She mentioned her next-door neighbor, an older man named Joe, who's been living alone since his wife passed away. Before the collapse, they barely spoke. But when Joe ran out of food a few weeks ago, Teresa brought him a hot meal. Since then, they've been sharing resources, her garden vegetables for his tools and handiwork. It's funny, she said. I've lived next to him for 10 years, and I feel like I just met him. That's one side of the story, the side where people come together, where community becomes the lifeline we all need. But there's another side, too. The side where fear and scarcity drive people apart. In Los Angeles, I heard about a family that was evicted from their apartment after their landlord raised the rent by 50%. They moved into their car, parking in a lot they thought was safe. But one night, another group of people, also living out of their car, told them to leave. There's not enough space here for everyone, they said. Find somewhere else. The mother told me how she begged them to let her stay, even just for one night. But they wouldn't budge. We're all just trying to survive, she said. But it feels like everyone's turning on each other. This is the reality of collapse. It pushes people to their limits, forcing choices they never thought they'd have to make. And those choices don't always align with the values we like to believe we hold. Stealing from a neighbor, turning away a stranger, hoarding what little you have, even when someone else is in need. These aren't just hypothetical dilemmas anymore. They're everyday decisions for millions of people. I think about Clara and her kids, Emma and Toby. About how she stood in line for hours at the food pantry, only to be turned away when supplies ran out. She told me how, on her way home, she saw a truck unloading bread at a nearby store. She didn't have any money, but she thought about taking a loaf and running. I didn't do it, she said, but I wanted to, and that scared me. It's not just the big moral questions that weigh on people, it's the small ones too, like whether to eat the last can of soup today or save it for tomorrow, whether to share what you have with a neighbor or keep it for your own family, whether to stay in a place that feels dangerous or leave and risk losing everything you can't carry. But even in the midst of these impossible choices, there are glimmers of humanity. Like the story of a group of strangers who started a makeshift soup kitchen in an abandoned parking garage in Detroit. They didn't have much, just a few pots, some donated vegetables, and a camp stove. But every night, they cook what they can and serve whoever shows up. One of them, a man named Carlos, told me, "We're all struggling, but that doesn't mean we can't help each other. Sometimes a bowl of soup is all it takes to remind someone that they're not alone." That's what I keep coming back to, the moments where people refuse to let the darkness take over. The moments where, even in the face of fear and scarcity, they choose kindness. It's not always easy, and it's certainly not always enough, but it matters. It matters because it's a reminder that even when everything else falls apart, we still have the capacity to care for one another. And maybe that's what will get us through this. Not the systems or institutions we once relied on. Not the money we thought would protect us. But the simple, stubborn act of caring. Of reaching out, even when it feels like the world is closing in. As the old systems crumble, something new is beginning to take shape. It's not organized, it's not efficient, and it's certainly not what anyone planned. But it's happening. Across towns and cities, people are finding ways to survive in a world that looks nothing like the one they knew. One of the most striking changes is the rise of barter economies. In the absence of reliable cash or functioning banks, people are trading what they have for what they need. Food for fuel, clothes for tools, medicine for labor. It's not a perfect system, far from it, but it's keeping people afloat. I heard about a farmer in Iowa named George who's been trading eggs and milk for everything from firewood to canned goods. It's like stepping back in time, he said. I used to laugh at the idea of bartering. It felt so old-fashioned. But now it's the only thing that makes sense. In Detroit, a mechanic named Lisa has turned her garage into a hub for trade. She repairs bikes and generators in exchange for food and supplies. People bring me what they've got, she said. Sometimes it's a bag of potatoes, sometimes it's a jug of water. I don't care. If I can fix something for them, I will. But this new way of living comes with its own challenges. Without any formal rules or protections, disputes can quickly escalate. I've heard stories of people being cheated in trades, or worse, robbed outright. Trust, already in short supply, is even harder to come by in a system like this. And yet, in some places, people are finding ways to make it work. In a small town in Oregon, a group of families has created a community ledger to track trades and ensure fairness. They meet every week to settle disputes, share updates, and plan for the future. One of them, a woman named Sarah, told me, "It's not perfect, but it's better than going it alone. We're learning as we go." That phrase, learning as we go, feels like it sums up so much of what's happening right now. Nobody planned for this. Nobody has a roadmap. Everyone is just doing their best to adapt to a world that's been turned upside down. In some ways, it's inspiring. People are rediscovering skills they never thought they'd need. Growing food, fixing things by hand, finding creative ways to get by. In cities, rooftops are being transformed into gardens. Empty lots are becoming communal spaces where people gather to share resources and knowledge. It's a reminder of how resourceful we can be when we have no other choice. But there's a darker side to this new normal. As communities come together, others are falling apart. In some neighborhoods, mistrust is growing faster than any sense of unity. Fences are going up, gates are being locked, and people are withdrawing into themselves. Every man for himself has become more than just a saying. It's a way of life for too many. I think about a story I heard from a woman in Texas. Her name is Maria, and she lives in a gated community that has turned into something out of a dystopian novel. The residents have set up patrols, armed with whatever they can find. Bats, crowbars, even a few hunting rifles. They've barricaded the entrances and won't let anyone in unless they live there. It feels safe, Maria said, but it also feels wrong. Like we've given up on being neighbors and started acting like enemies. That's the tension at the heart of all this. On one hand, there's a desperate need to protect what little you have. On the other, there's the knowledge that survival isn't something you can do alone. It's a balancing act, and not everyone is finding the right footing. But even in the darkest corners of this new reality, there are glimpses of light. I heard about a group of volunteers in Chicago who've turned an abandoned school into a shelter. They're providing food, beds, and medical care to anyone who needs it, no questions asked. One of the volunteers, a former nurse named Carla, told me, "We're not doing this because it's easy. We're doing it because it's the right thing to do. And honestly, it's the only thing that feels normal anymore." That's what I keep coming back to, the idea of normalcy. In a world where so much has been lost, people are clinging to whatever pieces of normal they can find. A warm meal, a helping hand, a sense of community, however fragile. Maybe that's what will get us through this. Not the big plans or sweeping reforms, but the small, quiet acts of resilience. The little moments that remind us of who we are and what we're capable of. In a world where the old systems have collapsed, the question of leadership becomes unavoidable. Who steps in to fill the void? Who takes responsibility when the institutions we relied on, governments, banks, corporations, are no longer there to guide or protect us? For many, the answer has been to turn inward. Grassroots groups are forming in neighborhoods, towns, and cities, driven not by ambition or politics, but by necessity. These aren't elected leaders or officials. They're ordinary people who saw a problem and decided to fix it. In Pennsylvania, I heard about a man named Victor who used to run a small hardware store. When the collapse hit, his store was one of the first to shut down. But instead of giving up, he opened the doors and invited his community inside. Now the store operates as a kind of resource hub. People bring tools, supplies, and food to share with their neighbors. Victor keeps track of what comes in and goes out, making sure it's distributed fairly. It's not about profit anymore, he told me. It's about survival. If I can help someone fix their roof or start a garden, that's worth more than any paycheck I ever got. This kind of leadership, informal, practical, and rooted in the needs of the moment, is popping up everywhere. In some places, it's individuals like Victor taking charge. In others, it's groups of people working together to make decisions and solve problems. They're not waiting for help to come from above, because they know it's not coming. But these grassroots efforts aren't without their challenges. Without formal systems in place, conflicts can quickly spiral out of control. In one town in Colorado, a dispute over water rights turned into a full-blown standoff. Two families, both desperate for access to a shared well, couldn't come to an agreement. It took weeks of mediation, led by a retired teacher with no legal training, to resolve the issue. And even then, the tension lingered. This is the reality of rebuilding trust. It's slow, it's messy, and it's fragile. One wrong move, one broken promise, can undo weeks or months of progress. I think about a story I heard from a woman named Evelyn in upstate New York. Before the collapse, she worked as a city planner, designing roads and buildings for a growing town. Now she's using those skills to organize her community. She's helped set up a barter system, coordinate food distribution, and even build a makeshift clinic in an abandoned warehouse. But what struck me most was what she said about trust. Trust isn't something you can demand, she said. You have to earn it, one small step at a time. And even then you have to work to keep it. It's like a bridge, stronger than it looks, but easy to burn if you're not careful. Evelyn's words stuck with me because they capture something so fundamental about this moment. Trust isn't just a nice idea. It's the foundation of everything. Without it, there's no cooperation, no community, no hope. But how do you rebuild trust in a world that's been defined by betrayal? How do you convince people to believe in each other again when they've been let down so many times before? For some, the answer has been transparency. In California, I heard about a group of farmers who've set up open meetings to discuss their harvests, trade deals, and resource allocations. Anyone can attend, anyone can ask questions, and decisions are made by consensus. It's not perfect, and it's not always efficient. But it works, because people feel like they have a voice. In other places, rebuilding trust has been about action. In a neighborhood in Atlanta, a group of volunteers has been going door to door, checking on elderly residents and offering help with basic needs. They don't ask for anything in return. They just show up again and again, proving through their actions that they can be counted on. And then there are the stories that defy explanation. Like the man in Seattle who's been giving away fresh bread every morning, no strings attached. Or the woman in Kansas who opened her home to strangers after her town's shelter filled up. These acts of kindness don't solve the larger problems, but they create moments of connection in a world that feels increasingly fractured. Still, not everyone is finding their way back to trust. In some communities, fear and suspicion are winning out. People are building walls, literal and figurative, to protect themselves from perceived threats. It's understandable, but it's also heartbreaking. Because the truth is, we can't rebuild alone. We need each other whether we like it or not. So what does leadership look like in this new world? It's not about titles or power. It's about showing up. It's about listening. It's about doing the work, even when it's hard, even when it feels like nobody's watching. And maybe, just maybe, it's about remembering that we're all in this together. When everything you know is stripped away, what's left? What does it mean to survive? Not just physically, but morally. These are the questions people are grappling with every day. And the answers aren't simple. For some, survival means doing whatever it takes. I've heard stories that would have seemed unthinkable just a year ago. People stealing from their neighbors, fighting over scraps of food, and turning their backs on those in need. It's easy to judge, but when hunger gnaws at you and fear takes root, morality can feel like a luxury you can't afford. I spoke to a man named Charles in Missouri. Before the collapse, he was a manager at a grocery store, a father of 3, and an active member of his church. He told me about the night he broke into an abandoned warehouse looking for supplies. "I didn't plan it," he said. "I was driving home and saw the place. I knew it had been closed for months, and I thought, maybe there's something left inside. I didn't think about whether it was right or wrong. I just thought about my kids." Charles found a case of canned vegetables and a box of protein bars. He took them home, feeling a mix of relief and shame. "I don't know if what I did was stealing," he said. "The store was empty. No one owned it anymore. But I still feel like I crossed a line." His story stayed with me because it highlights the impossible choices people are facing. In a world where the rules have disappeared, how do you decide what's right? How do you hold on to your values when survival feels like the only thing that matters? For others, survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about holding on to the things that make life worth living. I heard about a woman named Clara in Idaho who runs a tiny free library out of an old phone booth. She fills it with donated books, magazines, and puzzles. "It's not much," she said, "but it gives people a reason to smile. And right now, we need that more than ever." Clara's library doesn't solve the bigger problems. It doesn't feed the hungry or shelter the homeless. But it does something just as important. It reminds people that there's still beauty in the world, even when everything feels broken. These small acts of resistance, because that's what they are, really, are popping up everywhere. In Texas, I heard about a group of teenagers who started a community garden in an abandoned lot. They grow tomatoes, peppers, and herbs, sharing the harvest with anyone who needs it. One of them, a boy named Luis, told me, "We're not doing this because we're heroes. We're doing it because we're tired of waiting for someone else to fix things." In Michigan, a retired carpenter named Frank has been building makeshift shelters out of scrap wood for families who've lost their homes. He doesn't charge anything. "What am I going to do, sit around and watch people freeze?" he said. "I've got the skills and they've got the need. It's as simple as that." These stories give me hope, but they also make me think about the price of survival. For every Clara or Luis or Frank, there are people like Charles, forced to make choices that weigh heavily on their souls. There's no guidebook for this, no map to follow. Everyone is just doing the best they can with what they have. But sometimes, the cost of survival isn't just moral, it's physical. I've heard about people risking their lives to trade for food or medicine, walking miles through dangerous territory because they have no other option. In Atlanta, I met a man named Jerome who was attacked while carrying a bag of rice back to his family. He survived, but he told me, "It makes you wonder if it's even worth it. What's the point of surviving if you're just barely holding on?" That question haunts me. Because Jerome is right. Survival isn't enough. We need something more. We need hope, purpose, connection. Without those things, we're not really living. We're just existing. And that's why the small acts matter so much. The free libraries, the community gardens, the homemade shelters, they're not just about meeting physical needs. They're about reminding us of our humanity. They're about saying, we're still here and we still care. But caring isn't easy in a world like this. It takes courage, it takes strength, and it takes a kind of stubbornness that refuses to let the darkness win. I think about a letter I received from a man named Henry in Ohio. He wrote, "Every day I wake up and wonder if it's worth getting out of bed. But then I look at my granddaughter. She's 6 years old and she doesn't understand what's happening. She just knows that I make her breakfast and tell her stories and tuck her in at night. That's why I keep going. For her." Henry's words stayed with me because they capture something so essential about this moment. Even when everything feels lost, even when the world seems to be falling apart, there's still something to hold on to, something to fight for. And maybe in the end, that's what survival really is. Not just staying alive, but finding a reason to keep living. For all the visible signs of collapse, the empty shelves, the darkened streets, the shuttered schools, there's a deeper, quieter impact that doesn't show up in headlines or statistics. It's the weight people carry inside them, the fear, the grief, the loss of a world they thought they understood. Every conversation I have, every letter I read, carries a trace of it. It's in the tremble of a voice, the hesitation before answering a question. It's in the way people talk about their plans for the future, tentative, uncertain, as if they're afraid to believe in anything too much. I heard from a man named Arthur in Arizona. He's 48, a former truck driver who lost his job when the company he worked for went under. "I've been driving my whole life," he told me. "It's who I am, or at least it's who I was." He paused, then added, "I don't know who I am anymore. Without the job, without the routine, I feel like I'm just drifting, like I'm not really here." Arthur's words struck me because they echoed something I've heard from so many others. The collapse hasn't just taken away people's livelihoods. It's taken away their sense of identity. The roles they played, the paths they followed, they're gone now, leaving behind an emptiness that's hard to fill. For some, that emptiness turns into despair. I've heard about rising rates of depression, anxiety, even suicide. In a world where survival feels like an uphill battle, hope can be hard to hold on to. I read a letter from a woman named Linda in Maine. She wrote, "I try to stay strong for my kids, but it's hard. Every day feels like a fight, and some days I just don't have the strength. I wonder if it would be easier to give up." Linda's honesty is heartbreaking, but it's also brave, because admitting that you're struggling, especially in a world that demands resilience, is one of the hardest things to do. And yet, it's also one of the most important, because it reminds us that we're not alone in this. But despair isn't the only emotion people are wrestling with. There's also anger. Anger at the systems that failed them, at the leaders who looked the other way, at the sheer unfairness of it all. I think about a young man I met in Detroit named Jamal. He told me about how his mother worked 2 jobs for years to save up for a down payment on a house, only to lose everything when the bank foreclosed on her mortgage. "She did everything right," Jamal said, his voice shaking with rage. "She played by the rules, and they still took it all away. How is that fair? How is any of this fair?" Jamal's anger is justified. It's the kind of anger that comes from watching the people you love suffer for reasons that feel senseless and cruel. And he's not alone. Across the country, protests are erupting. People are taking to the streets, demanding answers, demanding change. Some of these protests remain peaceful, but many don't. It's hard to keep your cool when your world is falling apart. But anger, like despair, can be a double-edged sword. It can motivate you, push you to act, but it can also consume you if you're not careful. I think about a conversation I had with a man named Raul in Texas. He told me about how he spent weeks furious at the world, at the government, at the banks. "But then I realized something," he said. "My anger wasn't helping me. It wasn't fixing anything. So I decided to channel it into something useful." Raul started volunteering at a local food bank, helping to organize donations and distribute supplies. "It doesn't solve everything," he said, "but it feels better than just sitting around being mad." That's the thing about emotions. They're powerful, but they're also fleeting. Fear, anger, grief. They can knock you down, but they can also push you forward. The trick is figuring out how to harness them without letting them take over. I think about a story I heard from a woman named Sarah in Colorado. She lost her husband during the early days of the collapse, not because of the economy, but because of a heart attack. "He was my rock," she said, "the person I leaned on when things got tough. And now he's gone." She paused, her voice breaking. "I didn't think I could go on without him. But then I looked at my kids, and I realized I didn't have a choice." Sarah's resilience is extraordinary, but it's also deeply human. Because at the end of the day, that's what we do, isn't it? We keep going. We find reasons to get out of bed, even when it feels like the world is falling apart. We hold on to whatever scraps of hope we can find, even when they feel impossibly small. And sometimes we find that hope in the unlikeliest places. Like a letter I received from a man in Kentucky who's been teaching his neighbors how to repair old radios so they can stay connected. Or the woman in Oregon who started a quilting circle to create blankets for people in need. These aren't grand gestures. They're small, quiet acts of care. But they matter. Because in a world that feels increasingly fractured, these acts remind us of something we can't afford to forget. That we're still human. That we still have the capacity to love, to help, to hope. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. In the ruins of what once was, people are beginning to rediscover something they didn't know they'd lost, a sense of purpose. It's not the kind of purpose we used to talk about in boardrooms or self-help books. It's simpler, quieter, and yet somehow deeper. It's the kind of purpose that comes from knowing you're contributing to something larger than yourself. For some, this means reconnecting with skills they'd left behind in the rush of modern life. I heard about a man named Peter in Montana who's been teaching his neighbors how to hunt and fish. "These are things my dad taught me when I was a kid," he said. "Back then it felt like a hobby. Now it feels like a lifeline." Peter isn't the only one rediscovering old skills. Across the country, people are learning how to grow their own food, sew their own clothes, and fix things by hand. These aren't just practical skills. They're acts of resilience. They're ways of saying, we're still here and we're still capable. In Tennessee, a woman named Maggie has turned her backyard into a small farm. She raises chickens, grows vegetables, and even keeps bees for honey. "It started out as a way to feed my family," she told me. "But now it's become something more. I'm sharing what I grow with my neighbors. We trade eggs for milk, honey for bread. It's not perfect, but it works." Maggie's story is one of many that highlight a shift in how we think about community. In a world where institutions have failed, people are leaning on each other in ways they haven't for generations. It's not always easy. Trust is still fragile, and conflicts still arise. But it's happening. In Michigan, a group of families has created what they call a community kitchen. Each week, they take turns cooking meals for everyone in the neighborhood. "It's not about charity," one of the organizers told me. "It's about coming together. It's about making sure no one has to face this alone." These small, grassroots efforts are reshaping what it means to belong to a community. It's no longer about geography or convenience. It's about shared struggle and shared hope. It's about recognizing that, no matter how bad things get, we're stronger together than we are apart. But finding purpose isn't just about practical skills or community projects. For some, it's about creativity, about finding ways to express themselves in a world that feels increasingly chaotic. I heard about a man named Alex in New York who's been painting murals on the walls of abandoned buildings. "It's my way of making sense of all this," he said. "The world feels broken, but when I paint, I feel like I'm putting something back together." Alex's murals have become a source of inspiration for his neighborhood. People stop to watch him work, to talk about what the images mean, to feel a sense of connection in a place that often feels disconnected. "It's not much," Alex said, "but it's something." In Oregon, a woman named Eliza has been writing poetry and sharing it with her neighbors. She posts her poems on telephone poles and mailboxes, even on the sides of buildings. One of her poems reads, "The world is quiet, but not still. The earth beneath us turns. Even in the shadow of despair, a spark of hope still burns." Eliza told me, "I write because it helps me process what's happening. But I share it because I think we all need reminders that we're not alone." These creative acts, whether it's painting, writing, or something else entirely, are more than just hobbies. They're ways of finding meaning in a world that often feels meaningless. They're ways of saying, we're still here and we're still capable of beauty. But finding meaning doesn't always come naturally. For many, it's a struggle. I think about a man named David in Kansas who lost his wife during the early days of the collapse. "She was my everything," he said, "and when she died, I didn't see the point in going on. But then I realized something. She wouldn't want me to give up. She'd want me to keep fighting, to keep living. So that's what I'm trying to do." David has started volunteering at a local shelter, helping to rebuild homes for families who've lost everything. "It's hard work," he said, "but it's worth it. It gives me something to hold on to." That's what it comes down to, I think. Finding something to hold on to. Whether it's a skill, a community, or a creative outlet, It's about discovering the things that keep us grounded, the things that remind us of who we are and what we're capable of. Because in a world that's constantly shifting, those are the things that give us stability. They're the things that keep us human. When everything falls apart, the future feels like a distant, unreachable place. But even in the darkest moments, people are still dreaming. They're imagining what a new world might look like, one that doesn't repeat the mistakes of the old. For many, these dreams are small and personal. I heard about a man named Carlos in Nevada who's been teaching his children how to garden. It's not just about growing food, he said. It's about showing them that they can create something with their own hands, that they're not powerless. Carlos told me about his son Mateo, who planted a single sunflower seed in the middle of their backyard. Every day he checks on it, Carlos said, smiling. It's just one flower, but to him, it's everything. It's a sign that life can still grow, even now. In Vermont, I spoke to a woman named Lydia, who's been organizing storytelling nights in her community. People gather around a fire to share memories, jokes, and even hopes for the future. It's a way to keep our spirits up, she said, to remind ourselves that we're more than just survivors. We're people with stories, with dreams. One man at Lydia's gathering talked about how he hopes to rebuild the library in his town. It's been boarded up since the early days of the collapse, but he believes it could become a place of learning and connection again. Books are more than just words on a page, he said. They're a way to keep the past alive while imagining something better for the future. These small personal dreams are powerful, but they're not the only ones taking shape. In some places, people are starting to think bigger. They're asking hard questions about the systems that failed and how they can be rebuilt or replaced with something better. In California, I heard about a group of farmers and engineers who've come together to design sustainable farming methods. They're experimenting with rooftop gardens, vertical farming, and water-saving irrigation systems. The old way wasn't working, one of them told me. It was wasteful and fragile. We're trying to build something that lasts. In New York, a group of activists is working to create a new kind of governance for their community. They've set up a council where decisions are made collectively, with every voice carrying equal weight. We're tired of being ignored, one member said. This is about building a system where everyone matters. These efforts are small, and they're far from perfect. But they're signs of something important. A refusal to accept that this is all there is. A belief that even in the face of collapse, we have the power to shape what comes next. But dreaming isn't easy in a world like this. It takes courage to look beyond the immediate struggles, to imagine something better when the present feels so overwhelming. I think about a letter I received from a woman named Anna in Illinois. She wrote, "Sometimes I feel guilty for dreaming about the future, like I should be focusing on the here and now. But then I think, if we don't dream, what are we fighting for?" Anna's words stayed with me because they capture something so essential. Dreams aren't just luxuries, they're necessities. They're what keep us moving forward, even when the path ahead feels impossible. I heard about a man named Marcus in Georgia, who's been teaching children in his neighborhood how to build solar panels from salvaged materials. It's not just about power, he said. It's about showing them that they can solve problems, that they can create something that makes the world better. Marcus told me about one of his students, a 12-year-old girl named Aisha, who built her own small solar panel to power a lamp in her family's home. When she saw the light come on for the first time, Marcus said, her face lit up too. That's what this is about, giving people the tools to believe in themselves again. These moments of hope, of ingenuity, of dreaming, they're fragile, but they're real. They're reminders that even in the midst of despair, we have the capacity to imagine something better. And maybe that's where true resilience comes from, not just in surviving, but in dreaming of a future worth surviving for. One of the most powerful responses to this collapse has been the effort to remember. Not just the events themselves, but the lessons they carry. People are realizing that if this is ever going to mean something, if we're going to rebuild better, it starts with making sure these stories aren't lost. In Wisconsin, I heard about a teacher named Eliza, who has turned her small community library into an archive of the collapse. She's collecting letters, photographs, and journal entries from people in her town. History isn't just dates and facts, she said. It's the stories of ordinary people. and those stories matter. Eliza showed me a letter from a teenager named Sam, who wrote about what it felt like to lose his home. "I don't want people to forget," Sam wrote. "I want them to know what it was like so maybe they can stop it from happening again." That sentiment is echoed in places across the country. In New Mexico, a group of artists is creating a mural that tells the story of their town's journey through the collapse. It starts with vibrant colors, representing the community's strength, and shifts into darker shades as the hardships set in. But at the end, the colors begin to brighten again, symbolizing resilience and hope. "We don't want to just focus on the pain," one of the artists told me. "We want to show that even in the darkest times, there's light. There's always light." In Tennessee, a group of elders has started a storytelling circle where they share their memories with younger generations. They talk about what life was like before the collapse, what went wrong, and what they hope the future will look like. "This isn't just about passing on knowledge," one elder said. "It's about making sure we don't forget who we are." These efforts to preserve memory aren't just about the past, they're about the future. They're about ensuring that the mistakes of yesterday don't become the mistakes of tomorrow. And they're about giving people a sense of continuity in a world that feels increasingly fragmented. I think about a woman named Carla in Oregon who's been recording interviews with her neighbors. She asks them about their lives, their struggles, their dreams. "Everyone has a story," she said, "and those stories are worth saving." One of Carla's neighbors, a man named Henry, talked about how he's teaching his grandchildren to grow their own food. "It's not just a skill," he said. "It's a way of life. I want them to know how to take care of themselves, but I also want them to understand where their food comes from. I want them to respect the land." Henry's words stayed with me because they capture something so essential about this moment. This isn't just about surviving the collapse. It's about learning from it. It's about taking the hard lessons we're living through and turning them into something meaningful. In New York, I heard about a woman named Sophia who's been writing a book about her experiences. It's part memoir, part manual, filled with practical advice and personal reflections. "I don't know if anyone will read it," she said, "but it helps me to write it. It helps me make sense of all this." Sophia's book includes chapters on everything from how to start a garden to how to manage anxiety in uncertain times. But the part that struck me most was her chapter on hope. "Hope isn't something you find," she wrote. "It's something you create. It's a choice you make every single day, even when it feels impossible." That idea, that hope is a choice, feels so important right now. Because if we're going to move forward, if we're going to build something better, it starts with choosing to believe that it's possible. But remembering isn't just about hope. It's also about accountability. People are asking hard questions about what went wrong and who's responsible. In some places, communities are holding public forums where they discuss these questions openly. In others, grassroots movements are pushing for investigations into the decisions that led to the collapse. "It's not about blame," one organizer told me. "It's about understanding. If we don't understand what happened, how can we make sure it doesn't happen again?" That's the heart of it, I think. The effort to remember is an effort to learn, to take the pain and the loss and the mistakes and turn them into something that helps us grow. It's not easy, and it's not always clear how to do it, but it matters. Because if there's one thing this collapse has taught us, it's that we can't afford to forget. In the midst of so much hardship, it seems almost impossible to think about joy, and yet that's exactly what people are doing. They're finding ways to celebrate life, to connect with others, to remind themselves and each other that even in the darkest times, there's still room for happiness. I heard about a neighborhood in Chicago where once a week, people gather in the park for a potluck. It's not fancy, mostly simple dishes made from whatever people can spare, but it's become the highlight of the week for everyone involved. "It's not about the food," one woman told me. "It's about being together. It's about feeling like we're not just surviving, we're living." These gatherings have sparked something special. People bring instruments and sing songs, tell stories, and play games with the kids. For a few hours, it's as if the weight of the world lifts just enough to let them breathe. In a small town in Alabama, a man named Greg has been hosting movie nights on the side of an old barn. He uses a hand-cranked projector and plays whatever films he can find. Old comedies, family classics, anything that brings a smile. People need to laugh, Greg said. We've lost so much, but laughter? That's something we can still hold on to. Greg's movie nights have become a community event. Families bring blankets, popcorn made over open fires, and sometimes even homemade lemonade. It's not much, Greg admitted, but it's enough. In Kansas, I heard about a group of teenagers who started a weekly soccer game in an empty lot. They don't have uniforms or referees, just a patch of dirt and a ball that's been patched up more times than anyone can count. But that doesn't matter. What matters is the way they cheer each other on, the way they laugh when someone trips over their own feet, the way they forget, even for a little while, about everything else. I think about a story I heard from a woman named Maria in New Mexico. She told me about how every evening her family sits outside and watches the sunset together. It's such a small thing, she said, but it's beautiful. It reminds us that no matter what happens, the world is still turning. The sky is still there, and we're still here to see it. Maria's words stayed with me because they capture something so essential about joy. It doesn't have to be big or extravagant. Sometimes it's as simple as sharing a moment with the people you care about. But finding joy isn't just about escaping the pain. It's about finding strength in it. I think about a man named Paul in Oregon who plays the guitar outside the community shelter where he's staying. I'm not a great musician, he said, laughing, but music has always helped me get through tough times. And if it can help someone else, even for a minute, then it's worth it. Paul told me about how, one night, a little girl came up to him and asked if she could sing along. She didn't know all the words, he said, but she sang her heart out, and for those few minutes, it felt like nothing else mattered. That's the power of these moments. They don't erase the struggles or the pain, but they remind us that life is more than just hardship. They remind us that we're still capable of happiness, even when everything feels broken. In Maine, a group of retired teachers has been organizing nature walks for families. They teach the kids about local plants and animals, showing them how to identify edible berries or track footprints in the dirt. It's not just about survival skills, one of the teachers told me. It's about reconnecting with the world around us. It's about remembering that, even in the midst of chaos, nature is still there, steady and unchanging. These walks have become a source of comfort for many. Parents tell me about how their kids come home excited, full of stories about the things they saw and learned. And for the adults, it's a chance to step away from the weight of daily survival and just be present. Even in places where things are at their worst, people are finding ways to create joy. I heard about a woman named Clara in Texas who started baking bread in an old wood-fired oven and giving it to her neighbors. It's nothing fancy, she said, just flour, water, and a little yeast. But when you hand someone a warm loaf of bread, you can see it in their face. They feel cared for. These stories remind me of something I read in a letter from a listener in California. He wrote, "Joy isn't something you wait for. It's something you make. Even now, especially now, we have to find it. Because without joy, what are we even fighting for?" He's right. Joy doesn't just happen, it's a choice. It's something we have to seek out, to create, to hold on to with everything we've got. And when we do, it becomes a light in the darkness, a reminder that, no matter how bad things get, there's still beauty to be found. The collapse didn't just tear apart the systems we relied on. It forced us to question whether those systems were ever built to last. For many, the answer has been a resounding no. And now, people are beginning to imagine what a better future might look like. One brick, one seed, one idea at a time. I heard about a small town in Oregon where the community has banded together to create a self-sustaining village. They've repurposed abandoned buildings into homes, set up communal gardens, and installed solar panels scavenged from old facilities. "We're not just surviving," said one of the organizers, a woman named Julie. "We're trying to figure out how to thrive." Julie told me about how the village is organized. There's no mayor or council. Decisions are made collectively, with everyone having a say. It takes longer, she admitted, but it feels fairer. And after everything that's happened, fairness matters. This idea of collective decision-making is spreading. In New York, a group of urban planners and activists is working to design a new kind of city, a place where resources are shared, public spaces are prioritized, and the needs of the community come before profits. The old way didn't work, one of the planners said. It was too focused on growth, too blind to the cracks forming underneath. We need something that's built to last. These efforts aren't just happening in cities. In rural areas, people are rethinking how they use the land. I heard about a farming cooperative in Kansas that's experimenting with regenerative agriculture, methods that restore the soil and conserve water. It's not just about feeding people today, one of the farmers told me. It's about making sure we can feed them tomorrow, too. But building for the future isn't just about physical systems. It's about relationships. In North Carolina, a group of families has started what they call connection circles. Every week they meet to share meals, discuss challenges, and support each other. "We've realized that we're stronger together," said one of the participants, a man named Rob. "It's not just about survival, it's about community." These circles have become a place for people to heal, to process the trauma of the collapse, and to imagine what comes next. Rob told me about how, in one meeting, a woman suggested starting a skills exchange. Now, if someone knows how to fix a roof, they'll trade that skill for something else, like sewing or childcare. It's simple, but it works. In some places, people are even rethinking education. With schools closed or underfunded, communities are stepping in to teach the next generation. I heard about a man named James in Montana who's turned his barn into a classroom. He teaches kids everything from math and science to carpentry and mechanics. "These kids are the future," James said. "If we don't invest in them, what's the point of rebuilding?" James's students aren't just learning academic skills. They're learning how to think critically, how to solve problems, how to adapt. "The world they're growing up in is different from the one we knew," James said. "But that doesn't mean it can't be better." This idea of adapting to a new reality is at the heart of so many of these efforts. People aren't just trying to recreate what was lost. They're trying to create something better. Something that addresses the flaws and inequalities that the collapse laid bare. In Arizona, a group of engineers is working on a project to bring clean water to remote communities. They've built a network of solar-powered filtration systems that can turn even the dirtiest water into something drinkable. "Water is life," said one of the engineers. "If we can't get that right, nothing else matters." In Michigan, a coalition of activists is pushing for local energy independence. They're building wind turbines and microgrids, ensuring that communities have power even when larger systems fail. "We can't rely on the old infrastructure anymore," one activist said. "We need to take control of our own resources." These efforts are ambitious, and they're not without challenges. Resources are limited, conflicts arise, and progress can be slow. But they're also a testament to what's possible when people come together with a shared purpose. I think about a woman named Anita in Florida who's been organizing workshops on sustainable living. She teaches everything from composting and rainwater harvesting to preserving food without electricity. "It's not about going back to the past," she said. "It's about moving forward in a way that makes sense." Anita's workshops have drawn people from all walks of life, young and old, rich and poor, urban and rural. "What's happening now isn't just a crisis," she said. "It's an opportunity to rethink how we live, how we work, how we connect with each other." That word, opportunity, feels like a beacon in the midst of all this uncertainty. Because for all the loss and hardship, there's also a sense that this is a chance to start fresh, to build something that's not just different, but better. But seizing that opportunity requires courage. It requires imagination. And it requires a willingness to let go of what no longer serves us. I think about a letter I received from a listener in Texas. He wrote, "The collapse took away so much, but it also gave us something. The chance to do things differently. The chance to build a world that's fairer, kinder, and more sustainable. We can't waste that chance." He's right. We can't waste it. Because this isn't just about survival. It's about transformation. It's about taking the broken pieces of the old world and using them to build something new. And maybe, just maybe, that's how we'll find our way forward. When the world crumbles around you, the strength to keep moving forward often comes from a place you didn't know you had. A Emotional resilience isn't something you're born with. It's something you build, one small moment at a time. And right now, people are discovering just how much they're capable of enduring, adapting, and growing. I think about a woman named Linda in Ohio who wrote to me about her journey. She lost her job, her home, and nearly everything she owned in the collapse. At first, I thought I couldn't survive it, she wrote. I spent weeks crying, wondering how I'd ever pick myself back up. But then something changed. I realized that I had a choice. I could let this break me, or I could fight back. Linda started by setting small goals for herself. First, finding a place to stay. Then, learning how to grow her own food. Eventually, she found a community garden where she could work in exchange for supplies. It wasn't easy, she wrote. But every time I achieved one of those small goals, I felt a little stronger. And now, for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can see a future. Linda's story is a reminder that resilience doesn't mean never struggling. It means finding ways to keep going, even when it feels impossible. It means allowing yourself to feel the pain and fear, but not letting them define you. In California, I heard about a man named Miguel who's been organizing meditation sessions in his neighborhood. He sets up in an empty lot with a few blankets and invites anyone who's interested to join. This isn't about ignoring the world, he said. It's about finding peace within it, even if it's just for a few minutes. Miguel told me about how, at the end of each session, he asks everyone to share one thing they're grateful for. At first, people struggled to think of anything, he said. But over time, it got easier. Gratitude doesn't erase the pain, but it gives you a different way of looking at it. Gratitude, I've learned, is a cornerstone of resilience. It's not about pretending everything is fine. It's about finding the small things that are still good. A warm meal, a kind word, a moment of laughter. These are the things that anchor us when everything else feels uncertain. I think about a man named Thomas in Maine who wrote to me about his children. I've lost so much, he wrote, but every time I see my kids playing, every time I hear them laugh, I remember why I keep going. They're my hope. They're my reason. Thomas's words struck me because they highlight something so fundamental about resilience. It's not just about yourself. It's about the people you care about, the people you want to protect, the people who make life worth living. But resilience isn't just about hope. It's also about strength. And sometimes, that strength comes from the hardest moments. I spoke to a woman named Grace in Texas who told me about the night her house caught fire. She lost everything, but she managed to save her elderly mother and her 2 young sons. I didn't think I was strong enough to handle something like that, she said. But when it happened, I found a strength I didn't know I had. Grace's story stayed with me because it's a testament to what we're capable of when we're pushed to our limits. She didn't just survive that night, she's been rebuilding ever since. Every day is hard, she admitted. But every day I remind myself of what I've already overcome. And that gives me the courage to face whatever comes next. Courage is another key to resilience. It's not about being fearless. It's about acting in spite of your fear. It's about taking that first step, even when you don't know where it will lead. In Montana, I heard about a teenager named Elena who's been hiking to nearby towns to deliver supplies to elderly residents. I was scared at first, she told me. I didn't know if I'd get lost or if someone would try to take what I was carrying. But then I thought about the people who were waiting for me, and I knew I had to do it. Elena's courage has inspired her entire community. Neighbors who barely spoke to each other before are now coming together to support her efforts. She's shown us what's possible, one of them said. If a 16-year-old girl can do this, then so can we. That's the power of resilience. It's contagious. When you see someone else finding strength in the face of adversity, it makes you believe that you can, too. It creates a ripple effect, spreading hope and determination to everyone it touches. But resilience isn't just about surviving the present. It's about imagining the future. I think about a letter I received from a man named Robert in Colorado. He wrote, "Resilience isn't just bouncing back. It's growing back. It's becoming stronger, wiser, and more compassionate because of what you've been through." Robert's words are a reminder that resilience isn't the absence of struggle. It's the presence of growth. It's about taking the lessons of hardship and using them to build a life that's richer, deeper, and more meaningful. And maybe that's the greatest lesson of all, that even in the midst of pain, there's room for growth, that even in the darkest times, there's light to be found, and that even when everything feels lost, we have the power to begin again. Each story I've shared is like a single thread, fragile on its own, but woven together, they form a tapestry. This tapestry tells a story not just of loss, but of endurance, of rebuilding, and of humanity's remarkable ability to adapt. It's a story that reminds us of what we're capable of when we refuse to give up. One thread comes from a small fishing village in Louisiana. When the collapse disrupted their supply chains, the community came together to pool resources and share skills. Fishermen taught their neighbors how to catch crabs and shrimp, while others taught sewing, carpentry, or gardening. "We're not just surviving, we're thriving in our own way," one fisherman told me. "We've remembered how to lean on each other." Another thread comes from the mountains of Colorado, where a group of hikers discovered an abandoned lodge and turned it into a sanctuary for displaced families. They repaired the roof, cleared the debris, and stocked it with supplies. "It's not just a shelter," said one of the hikers. "It's a place where people can start over." In these threads, there's a pattern, a collective resilience, a shared determination to move forward. Each community is finding its own way, but together, they form a larger picture of hope. One of the most striking aspects of this tapestry is the way people are rediscovering the value of connection. In the old world, it was easy to live in silos, to focus on your own life and forget about the people around you. But now, connection has become a lifeline. In Kansas, a woman named Alice started a weekly soup night in her backyard. At first, it was just her and a few neighbors. But as word spread, more and more people began showing up, bringing whatever they could contribute. "It's not just about the food," Alice said. "It's about the conversations, the laughter, the feeling that we're all in this together." Alice's soup night has become a symbol of what's possible when people come together. Strangers have become friends, neighbors have become family, and the community has become stronger than ever. Another thread comes from a man named Victor in California. He's been walking miles every week to collect firewood for families who can't gather it themselves. "It's a small thing," Victor said, "but it's something I can do. And in times like these, every little bit helps." Victor's story is a reminder that resilience isn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes it's about the quiet, consistent acts of care that add up over time. It's about showing up, day after day, even when it feels like the world is against you. But this tapestry isn't just made of individual threads. It's held together by something larger. It's held together by the belief that we're stronger together than we are apart. That no matter how bad things get, we can find a way forward if we lean on each other. I think about a letter I received from a woman named Rebecca in Michigan. She wrote, "The collapse took away so much, but it also brought us closer. I know my neighbors now in a way I never did before. We've laughed together, cried together, and helped each other in ways I never thought possible. And somehow, that gives me hope." Rebecca's words highlight something so important. Resilience isn't just about survival. It's about connection. It's about realizing that we're not alone in this, and that together, we can build something better. In Arizona, a group of young people has been organizing cleanup efforts in abandoned neighborhoods. They clear debris, plant flowers, and paint murals on empty buildings. "We're not just cleaning up the mess," one of them said. "We're creating a space where people can feel proud to live again." Their work has inspired others to join in, transforming entire blocks into places of color and life. "It's amazing what a little paint and a lot of heart can do," one volunteer said. "It reminds people that even in the worst times, beauty is still possible." This idea of finding beauty in the midst of hardship is woven throughout the tapestry. It's in the laughter of children playing soccer on a dusty field. It's in the warmth of a shared meal. It's in the kindness of a stranger offering a helping hand. And maybe that's what makes this tapestry so powerful. It's not just a story of survival. It's a story of humanity, of what we're capable of when we refuse to give up, of the ways we find strength in each other, even when everything else feels uncertain. As I think about all these threads, I can't help but feel a sense of awe, because together, they create something bigger than any one of us. They create a picture of a world that, while broken, is still full of possibility. And that, I think, is the ultimate lesson of this collapse. That even in the darkest times, there's light. That even in the face of loss, there's hope. And that together, we can create something not just new, but better. As I reflect on everything we've explored, every story of loss, resilience, and hope, I'm reminded of one undeniable truth: humanity endures. We adapt, we rebuild, and through it all, we find ways to hold on to the things that matter most. This collapse has forced us to confront who we are and what we value. It has stripped away the noise, the distractions, and the illusions, leaving us with something raw but real. In this stripped-down world, we're learning what it truly means to live. I think about a woman named Evelyn in Kentucky who's been teaching her neighbors how to can fruits and vegetables. She told me, "This isn't just about food. It's about knowledge. It's about making sure the next generation knows how to take care of themselves." Evelyn's words stayed with me because they capture something so essential about this moment. The skills we're rediscovering, the connections we're rebuilding, the lessons we're learning, they're not just for us. They're for the future. In Louisiana, a man named Carl has been writing letters to his grandchildren who live in another state. He doesn't know when or if they'll be able to read them, but he writes anyway. "I want them to know what we went through," he said. "But more than that, I want them to know what we learned, that no matter how bad things get, we're stronger together, that kindness matters, that hope isn't just a feeling, it's a choice." Carl's letters are part of a larger effort to document this time. Across the country, people are writing journals, recording videos, and sharing their stories in any way they can. They're creating a record not just of the collapse, but of the resilience that followed. They're ensuring that the lessons we're learning aren't forgotten. In Colorado, a group of artists has started a traveling exhibit that showcases these stories. They've collected photographs, letters, and artifacts from people across the country and turned them into a tapestry of human experience. "This isn't just history," one of the organizers said. "It's a reminder of who we are, of what we can overcome." But perhaps the most powerful reminders aren't found in museums or journals. They're found in the everyday acts of care and connection that define this new world. They're found in the mother who shares her last loaf of bread with a neighbor, in the child who plants a seed in the cracked soil, in the community that comes together to rebuild, one small step at a time. These moments remind us that resilience isn't just about bouncing back. It's about moving forward with purpose. It's about carrying the lessons of the past into the future, so that we don't just rebuild what was, but create something better. I think about a letter I received from a man named Daniel in Michigan. He wrote, "This collapse has taken so much from us, but it's also given us a chance to start fresh, a chance to build a world that's fairer, kinder, and more sustainable. We can't let that chance slip away." Daniel's words are a call to action, a reminder that the future isn't something that happens to us. It's something we create. And even now, amid the rubble, people are beginning to create it. In Arizona, a group of engineers is designing modular homes that can be built quickly and sustainably. In New York, activists are organizing to demand accountability and transparency in government. In Oregon, farmers are sharing seeds and knowledge to create a network of resilient local food systems. These efforts are small, but they're growing. They're laying the foundation for a world that learns from the mistakes of the past. A world that values community over competition, sustainability over convenience, and kindness over greed. But building that world will take time. It will take effort, and it will take hope. Hope that, even when the road ahead feels long and uncertain, we can find a way forward. And I think about a conversation I had with a woman named Maria in Texas. She told me about how, every evening, she lights a candle in her window. "It's a small thing," she said, "but it's my way of saying, we're still here. It's my way of holding on to hope." Maria's candle is a reminder that hope doesn't have to be grand or dramatic. Sometimes, it's as simple as a light in the darkness, a quiet act of defiance against despair. And maybe, in the end, that's what this moment is all about. Not just surviving the collapse, but finding ways to shine, even in the shadow of it. Finding ways to carry hope forward. one small act at a time. As I close this reflection, I want to leave you with a thought. The future isn't written. It's being written, right now, by every choice we make, by every seed we plant, every connection we build, every moment of kindness we offer. So if you're listening to this, know that you're part of that story. Know that your resilience, your hope, your humanity, they matter. They're the threads that will weave the tapestry of tomorrow. And together, we can make that tomorrow brighter than the world we've left behind. The future we face isn't a return to what we once knew. It's a step into the unknown. But as I reflect on everything we've endured, I'm struck by the quiet strength that emerges when people refuse to let despair take hold. The road ahead may be uncertain, but the spirit of humanity remains steady, a light guiding us through the darkness. I recently spoke with a man named Samuel in Pennsylvania. He lost his job, his home, and for a time his sense of direction. But when I asked him what keeps him going, he didn't hesitate. "My daughter," he said. "She's 6 years old, and she still believes the world is a good place. I'm trying to make sure she's right." Samuel spends his days helping neighbors repair homes damaged in the early chaos of the collapse. "It's slow work," he said, "but every nail, every board, it's a step forward. It's proof that we can rebuild." His words resonate with something I've heard from so many others, that progress doesn't always come in leaps and bounds. Sometimes it's about the small, steady steps that carry us forward. It's about the determination to try, even when success feels far away. I think about a group of women in Mississippi who've been knitting blankets for families living in temporary shelters. "It's not much," one of them said, "but it's a way of saying, we see you, we care." That simple act of care is at the heart of everything we're building. It's in the gardens sprouting in empty lots, in the songs sung around campfires, in the hands that reach out to help a stranger. It's in the way people are finding joy amid the hardship, laughter amid the tears, and hope amid the ruins. In Maine, a retired teacher named Eleanor has been writing a series of essays about what it means to live through this time. In one essay she wrote, "We're learning that resilience isn't about being unshaken. It's about being able to bend without breaking. It's about finding strength in our vulnerabilities and hope in each other." Eleanor's words capture something so essential about this moment. Resilience isn't about pretending everything is fine. It's about acknowledging the pain while refusing to be defined by it. It's about finding ways to grow, even in the harshest conditions. In Colorado, I heard about a community that's been working to restore an old school building. They don't have the funds or the equipment to bring it back to its former glory, but they've cleared the debris, repaired the roof, and painted the walls. "It's not perfect," one of the volunteers said, "but it's ours, and that makes it enough." That sense of ownership, of agency, is so important. It's a reminder that, even when so much is out of our control, we still have the power to shape our own stories. We still have the power to build something meaningful. And that's what gives me hope. Not just the resilience of individuals, but the way those individual acts come together to create something larger. A network of care, a tapestry of humanity, a foundation for a future that's better than the past. I think about a letter I received from a man named Lucas in Oregon. He wrote, "The collapse taught us how fragile everything was, but it also taught us how strong we can be. It taught us that we don't need as much as we thought we did, that what really matters is each other." Lucas's words are a reminder that, for all the loss we've experienced, we've also gained something. We've gained perspective, we've gained clarity about what truly matters, and we've gained a renewed sense of connection to the people and the world around us. As I bring this reflection to a close, I want to leave you with one final thought. The road ahead will be long, and it won't always be easy. But every step we take is a step toward something new, something possible, something worth fighting for. So if you're listening to this, know that you're not alone. Know that your struggles, your hopes, your dreams, they're part of something bigger. They're part of a story that's still being written, and together we'll write a future that's brighter than anything we've left behind. A future where resilience, care, and hope guide us forward. a future where humanity doesn't just survive, but thrives. Because no matter how dark the night, the dawn always comes. And with it, the promise of a new day. As the first rays of sunlight break over the horizon, there's a quiet stillness in the air, a moment where everything feels possible. It's in this stillness that the future begins to take shape, not with fanfare or grand proclamations, but in the small, steady acts of rebuilding that happen every day. I received a letter from a young woman named Emily in Iowa. She wrote, "The mornings are my favorite part of the day now. It's when the world feels quiet enough for hope to sneak in. I sit on my porch with a cup of tea, and I imagine all the things we can create, all the ways we can grow." Emily's words remind me of something I've seen again and again in these stories: the power of imagination. The ability to look at a broken world and see not just what's missing, but what's possible. It's this vision, this belief in possibility, that drives us forward. In Georgia, a man named Jamal has been organizing sunrise walks for his community. "We start early," he said, "before the world gets too busy. We walk together, we talk, and we watch the sun come up. It's a way to remind ourselves that every day is a chance to start over." Jamal's walks have become a tradition, drawing people from all walks of life. Parents bring their children, elders share stories, and strangers become friends. "It's not about the walking," Jamal said. "It's about being together. It's about starting the day with hope." That hope isn't just an abstract idea. It's a force. It's what keeps us moving, keeps us building, keeps us dreaming. It's what turns a barren field into a garden, an empty house into a home, a fractured community into a family. In Michigan, a group of farmers has started what they call sunrise markets. They set up stalls at dawn, selling fresh produce, baked goods, and handmade crafts. "It's more than just a market," one farmer told me. "It's a celebration. It's a way to say we're still here and we're still growing." These markets have become a gathering place, a source of life and energy for the surrounding towns. People come not just to buy and sell, but to connect, to share stories, to find comfort in each other's company. "It's amazing," the farmer said, "how something so simple can bring so much joy." That joy is contagious. It spreads through the smiles of children playing in the streets, the laughter of neighbors sharing a meal, the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. It reminds us that, no matter how much we've lost, we're still capable of creating something beautiful. I think about a letter I received from a man named Peter in Oregon. He wrote, "Every time I plant a seed, I feel like I'm planting a piece of hope. It's a small act, but it feels powerful, because it's a way of saying the future matters." Peter's words capture something so important about this moment. The choices we make today, however small, are the building blocks of tomorrow. Every seed planted, every kindness extended, every step taken toward rebuilding is a declaration of faith in the future. In Texas, a group of artists has been painting murals on the walls of abandoned buildings. Each mural tells a story of loss, of resilience, of hope. "We want people to see these walls and remember that they're not just ruins," one artist said. "They're canvases, they're opportunities." These murals have transformed the landscape, turning places of despair into places of inspiration. They've become landmarks, drawing people from miles around to witness the creativity and resilience of a community determined to rise. This is what the dawn of a new day looks like. It's not flashy or loud. It's quiet, steady, and full of possibility. It's a farmer planting seeds in the early morning light. It's a child painting a rainbow on a cracked wall. It's a group of neighbors coming together to share a meal, a laugh, a moment of connection. It's all of us finding our way forward, one step at a time. As I reflect on these stories, I'm filled with a deep sense of gratitude for the resilience of the human spirit, for the kindness that endures even in the darkest times, and for the hope that refuses to fade. These are the things that will carry us through. These are the things that will light the way. So, as we step into this new day, let's carry these lessons with us. Let's remember the strength we've found, the connections we've built, and the dreams we've dared to dream. Let's hold on to the belief that, no matter how broken the world may seem, we have the power to create something better. Because the dawn isn't just the end of the night, it's the beginning of everything. As the world begins to find its footing again, there's an unspoken understanding among so many. This is a chance, not just to rebuild, but to reimagine. To create a tomorrow that reflects the lessons we've learned and the values we've rediscovered. I think of a community in Vermont that's rewriting the way they live. They've torn down fences that once divided properties and turned their backyards into one shared garden. They've built a communal kitchen where anyone can cook and eat. We used to be so isolated, one resident told me. Now, we're a family. Their model is spreading. People from nearby towns come to see what they've built, to ask questions, to imagine doing the same in their own neighborhoods. It's not about copying what we've done, another resident said. It's about finding what works for you. It's about realizing that we don't have to do this alone. That realization, that we're stronger together, is taking root everywhere. In cities and towns, people are finding ways to collaborate, to share resources, to support each other. They're building networks of trust and care that feel stronger than anything that came before. In Washington, a man named Carlos has been leading workshops on how to create microgrids. The old energy system failed us, he said. But that doesn't mean we're powerless. We can generate our own energy, right here in our neighborhoods. Carlos's workshops have inspired dozens of communities to set up their own solar panels and wind turbines. They're no longer waiting for outside help. They're creating their own solutions. It's about more than electricity, Carlos said. It's about independence. It's about taking control of our future. That future is being shaped in other ways too. In New Mexico, a group of teachers has started a traveling school. They move from town to town, teaching children and adults alike. Their curriculum includes everything from basic math and reading to survival skills and community organizing. Education isn't just about facts, one teacher told me. It's about empowerment. It's about giving people the tools they need to thrive. These traveling teachers have become a beacon of hope for the places they visit. They bring more than knowledge. They bring connection, inspiration, and a sense of possibility. Every time they leave, one student said, we feel a little stronger, a little more capable. That strength is evident in so many ways. In Michigan, a group of elders has been teaching younger generations how to preserve food, sew clothing, and build shelters. These are the skills that kept us alive before, one elder said. And they're the skills that will keep us alive now. In Florida, a network of fishermen has organized to ensure that no one in their community goes hungry. They share their catches, teach others how to fish, and host communal meals on the beach. We can't wait for someone else to save us, one fisherman said. We have to save ourselves. That spirit of self-reliance paired with a deep sense of community is what makes this moment so powerful. It's what gives me hope for the road ahead. But hope isn't just about the big projects or the sweeping changes. It's in the small, quiet moments that happen every day. It's in the way a mother teaches her child to bake bread, in the way a neighbor stops to help repair a broken fence, in the way strangers share a smile as they pass each other on the street. These moments remind us that the world isn't just something that happens to us. It's something we create together. And as we move forward, we have the chance to create a world that's more just, more compassionate, and more resilient than the one we left behind. I think of a letter I received from a woman named Sarah in North Carolina. She wrote, "The collapse took away so much, but it also gave us something, the chance to start over, the chance to build a world that values people over profits, community over competition, and kindness over greed." Sarah's words feel like a blueprint for the future, a reminder that, while the path ahead may be uncertain, it's also full of possibility. So as we step into tomorrow, let's carry these lessons with us. Let's remember the strength we've found, the connections we've built, and the dreams we've dared to dream. Let's hold on to the belief that no matter how broken the world may seem, we have the power to create something better. Because tomorrow isn't just a destination, it's a promise. A promise that, together, we can build a world where hope shines brighter than fear. A world where kindness is our greatest strength. A world where every dawn brings the possibility of something new. And that, more than anything, is a future worth fighting for. As we move toward what lies ahead, There's something extraordinary about the stories we've lived through and the lessons they carry. These moments, small and large, are shaping not just the present, but the foundation for generations to come. What we do now, the choices we make, will echo far beyond our lifetimes. I received a letter from an elderly man named Arthur in Montana. He wrote, "I'm planting trees I'll never see grow tall. But that's okay. I'm doing it for my grandchildren, so they'll have shade and fruit, and something to remind them that life goes on." Arthur's words are a testament to the power of legacy. He's not just planting trees, he's planting hope. He's showing that even in the face of uncertainty, we can leave behind something meaningful. Something that says, we were here, and we believed in the future. In a small village in New Hampshire, I heard about a group of families who've come together to rebuild an old schoolhouse. They're not just fixing the walls and painting the rooms, they're filling the building with life. "We want this to be a place where our kids can dream," one parent told me. "A place where they can learn, grow, and imagine a world better than the one we're giving them." The schoolhouse has become a hub of activity. Children gather there not just to study, but to play, create, and connect. Parents volunteer as teachers, bringing their own skills and passions to the classroom. "It's not perfect," another parent admitted, "but it's ours, and it's enough." This sense of ownership, of agency, is what defines so much of what's happening now. People aren't waiting for the world to fix itself. They're taking action. They're creating the future with their own hands, their own hearts, and their own hope. I think about a story I heard from a woman named Priya in California. She's been leading workshops on storytelling, teaching people how to share their experiences in ways that inspire and connect. "Stories are how we remember," she said. "They're how we carry our lessons forward. They're how we say, this is who we are, and this is who we can be." Priya told me about one of her students, a young boy named Matteo, who wrote a story about a sunflower growing through a crack in the pavement. "He said the sunflower was like us," Priya explained. "It found a way to grow, even in the hardest conditions, and that's what we're doing too." That image of the sunflower has stayed with me. It's a symbol of resilience, of beauty, of life finding a way. It's a reminder that even in the harshest circumstances, there's room for growth. In Texas, a group of artists has been working to capture this resilience in a series of paintings. Each piece depicts a moment of hope, a family sharing a meal, children playing in the rain, neighbors helping each other rebuild. "We want people to see these images and remember what we're capable of," one artist said. "Not just the pain, but the strength. Not just the loss, but the love." These paintings are being displayed in community centers, libraries, and even on the sides of buildings. They've become a source of inspiration, a way to remind people of the light that shines even in the darkest times. And it's not just art that's capturing these moments. In Wisconsin, a group of musicians has been writing songs about the collapse and the recovery. One of their most popular songs is called "Carry It Forward," and it's become an anthem for many. The chorus goes, "We've been through the fire, we've walked through the rain, but we'll carry it forward. We'll rise again." That's what so many people are doing now. They're carrying it forward. They're taking the pain, the loss, and the lessons, and they're turning them into something meaningful. They're creating a legacy of hope, one that will endure long after this moment has passed. I think about a conversation I had with a woman named Clara in New York. She told me about how her community has started planting a garden of hope in the center of their neighborhood. Each plant represents a story, a memory, or a dream. "This isn't just a garden," Clara said. "It's a promise that will keep growing no matter what." As the garden blooms, it's become a place of gathering, reflection, and connection. People come to share their stories, to find solace, to remind themselves of the beauty that still exists in the world. "Every flower," Clara said, "is a reminder that we're still here, that we're still growing." And maybe that's the greatest legacy we can leave behind, the reminder that we endured, that we found strength in each other, even when everything else felt uncertain, that we built something beautiful, even in the face of loss, that we carried it forward. As I think about all these stories, of trees being planted, schools being rebuilt, gardens blooming, and songs being sung, I'm filled with a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the resilience of the human spirit, for the kindness that endures even in the hardest times, and for the hope that refuses to fade. This is our legacy. This is our promise. And as we carry it forward, we're not just shaping the future, we're ensuring that it's a future worth living in. A future where every act of kindness, every moment of connection, every seed of hope becomes a part of something greater. Because this isn't just about surviving, it's about thriving. It's about building a world where hope is the foundation, where resilience is the norm, and where humanity shines brighter than ever before. And that, more than anything, is a legacy worth leaving. As we stand at the edge of a new beginning, it's clear that the seeds of tomorrow are already taking root. They're in the stories of resilience and kindness, in the lessons we've learned, and in the dreams we've dared to dream. These seeds hold the promise of a future that, while uncertain, is filled with potential. I think about a young boy named Isaiah in Tennessee. His family lost their home in the early days of the collapse, and they've been living in a makeshift shelter ever since. But Isaiah doesn't focus on what they've lost. He focuses on what they can create. When I grow up, he told me, I'm going to build houses for people who don't have them. Big houses with lots of rooms, so no one has to feel like we do. Isaiah's dream is a seed. It's a small, fragile thing, but it holds within it the power to change the world. And he's not alone. Everywhere I look, I see people planting their own seeds, ideas, projects, acts of care that have the potential to grow into something extraordinary. In Minnesota, a woman named Lydia has started a hope exchange. It's a simple idea. People leave what they can spare and take what they need. A jar of honey, a bag of rice, a pair of boots. It's not just about things, Lydia said. It's about trust. It's about showing people that we can take care of each other. The Hope Exchange has become a lifeline for many in Lydia's community. But more than that, it's become a symbol of what's possible when we choose generosity over greed, connection over isolation. I think about a letter I received from a man named Javier in Texas. He wrote, "Before the collapse, I didn't know my neighbors. I didn't even know their names. But now, we share everything, our food, our tools, our stories. We've become a family, and that's something I'll never take for granted again." Javier's words are a reminder that the seeds of tomorrow aren't just in the big projects or the ambitious plans. They're in the everyday acts of care and connection that bring people together. They're in the way a community comes together to rebuild a park, the way a stranger stops to help someone in need, the way people find joy in the simplest things. In Colorado, a group of teenagers has started a project they call Grow Forward. They plant trees and wildflowers in places that were abandoned or destroyed. "We want to leave something beautiful behind," one of them said, "something that will last." Their work has transformed the landscape, turning empty lots and overgrown fields into places of color and life. "It's amazing how much hope a single tree can bring," another teenager said. "It's like saying, we believe in the future." That belief is what ties all these stories together. It's what drives people to keep going, to keep building, to keep dreaming. It's the thread that connects a child planting a sunflower, a farmer sharing seeds, a community rebuilding a school. And it's not just about creating a better world for ourselves. It's about creating a better world for the generations that will come after us. A world where kindness and connection are the norm, where resilience is celebrated, and where hope is a constant companion. I think about a story I heard from a woman named Rosa in Florida. She's been teaching her grandchildren how to grow their own food, how to fish, how to build a fire. "These are the skills that kept us alive," she said, "and now they'll keep them alive too." Rosa's lessons are more than just practical. They're a way of passing on the values that have carried her family through this time. Values like resourcefulness, perseverance, and care for one another. "I want them to know that even when the world feels broken, they have the power to make it whole again," she said. That power, the power to make things whole, is something we all share. It's in the choices we make, the actions we take, the seeds we plant. It's in the way we choose to see the world, not just as it is, but as it could be. And as we move forward, those seeds will grow. They'll become gardens, forests, and fields of possibility. they'll become homes, communities, and legacies. They'll become the foundation of a world that's stronger, kinder, and more resilient than the one we've left behind. So, as we carry these stories with us, let's remember the seeds we're planting today. Let's nurture them with care, protect them with resilience, and watch them grow into something extraordinary. Because tomorrow isn't just something we hope for, it's something we create. And together, we can create a future that's brighter, better, and more beautiful than we ever imagined.